Inside the Monday morning coffee shop, the espresso machine screamed louder than conversation. Rain hammered the windows of Harbor Grounds Cafe, sending customers rushing through the door with soaked jackets and irritation carved into their faces. The place smelled like burnt beans and wet wool, that particular Seattle perfection of misery wrapped in caffeine ritual. A woman in a red coat stepped to the counter. Tall, composed blonde hair pulled back in a twist that looked expensive, even under fluorescent lights. She wore a small hearing aid tucked behind her left ear, subtle but visible if you knew what to look for. Her hands moved in careful gestures, asking for something the barista couldn't understand. Tyler, 23, and certain the world owed him better than minimum wage, just stared at her. Then he laughed, the kind that cuts. "Lady, I don't know what you're doing, but if you can't talk, maybe you should order online." A few customers nearby chuckled. One woman whispered to her friend, words designed to carry, "Welcome to Seattle, where everybody wants special treatment." The blonde woman's face didn't change. She'd learned not to expect kindness. Her expression stayed carefully neutral, the kind people wear when disappointment has become architecture. But something flickered in her eyes, something that looked like the 10,000th paper cut, the one that finally makes you wonder why you bother. She stood there, didn't leave. Hands moving again, slower this time, more deliberate. Asking, still asking. In the corner, wiping down the tables that would be dirty again in 5 minutes, Ethan Carter looked up. 36 years old, and every morning he woke to silence, the kind that came after something beautiful had been ripped away. His apron was stained, his jeans worn at the knees, his hands marked with small burns from careless moments against hot metal. The silver bracelet on his wrist, it caught the light, 5 words engraved, "Listen with your heart." Beside him, a little girl with brown curls tied back in a ponytail tugged his sleeve. 7 years old backpack, still on, pink jacket, bright against the cafe's dim interior. Her small hands moved rapidly, signing in American Sign Language. "She's like me, did." Ethan saw the woman at the counter, saw the hearing aid, saw the way she held herself with dignity while people laughed. Something in him cracked open the way ice breaks when the temperature shifts just 1 degree. He walked over to his hands already moving as he approached. "What would you like?" The woman's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with something between shock and disbelief. For a moment, she didn't respond, as if she couldn't process that someone had actually signed to her. Then her hands moved, careful and grateful. "Oat milk latte, no sugar, please." Ethan turned to Tyler, voice flat with the kind of authority that doesn't need volume. "Oat milk latte, no sugar." Tyler's smirk faded. He rang it up without another word, suddenly very interested in the register. While they waited, the little girl stepped closer to the woman. She looked up with brown eyes that saw too much for 7 years, hands moving with the fearless honesty children carry before the world teaches them to hide. "You're beautiful. I like your red coat." The woman blinked rapidly. Then she smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened the hard edges of her face. She knelt down to the girl's level movements, graceful despite the expensive heels. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're brighter than sunshine." A single tear rolled down the woman's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, like she wasn't used to crying in public, like crying was a language she'd forgotten. But Ethan saw it, saw the loneliness in that single gesture of being understood. When the latte was ready, the woman reached into her coat and pulled out a business card. Thick stock, cream-colored, the kind that cost money to print. She placed it on the counter in front of Ethan, then signed in "Thank you" before walking out into the rain. Ethan picked up the card. The room tilted. Vivian Ashford, Chief Executive Officer, Nextline Technologies. The logo gleamed under the lights, mocking him. That company, that name. 3 years of grief crystallized into 8 words on expensive cardstock. That company had taken away the person he loved most in this world. Lily was tugging his sleeve again, asking what was wrong. But Ethan couldn't move. He just stared at the card, watching the letters blur as memory dragged him backward. 3 years ago, he'd been a software engineer specializing in artificial intelligence. Grace had worked beside him in the industry, brilliant and passionate about making technology safer. They'd shared a small house in Capitol Hill with Lily, who was born deaf but whose laughter filled every room anyway. Then came the accident. A self-driving car manufactured by Nextline Technologies had malfunctioned on a rainy highway. The vehicle's software failed to detect stopped traffic ahead. Grace had been crossing the street with groceries, stepping carefully across the legal crosswalk under a green light. She never had a chance. The lawsuit Ethan filed got dismissed. Evidence disappeared. The company's lawyers were too powerful, their resources infinite, compared to his grief. He lost his job when he became too vocal about corporate accountability, lost the house when legal fees drained their savings. All he had left was Lily in a rage so deep it had nowhere to go but inward. Now he worked night shifts at Harbor Grounds, living in a cramped studio apartment where the heating barely worked and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing about bills they couldn't pay. Lily's drawings covered every surface anyway. Crayon landscapes, finger-painted sunsets, a child's vision of color in a world that had gone gray. Every evening before his shift, Ethan counted cash in the kitchen drawer. Rent was due in 11 days. Lily's tuition at the special school for deaf children was due in 14. He picked up extra shifts, fixing cars at a garage on weekends, coming home with oil under his fingernails and exhaustion in his bones. The bracelet on his wrist was the last thing Grace had given him, engraved with her favorite reminder. Listen with your heart. She'd handed it to him on his last birthday before she died, back when they still believed the world was fair and good people were rewarded. If he lost his job at the cafe, there would be no backup plan. No savings account, no family to call, just him and Lily against a city that had already proven it didn't care. That night after his shift ended and he walked Lily home through rain that never seemed to stop, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table while his daughter did homework. Second-grade math addition problems that should have been simple but somehow weren't when your brain was elsewhere. He opened the refrigerator, 2 eggs, half a gallon of milk going sour, some vegetables wilting in the crisper. Dinner would be scrambled eggs on toast, the same as yesterday, the same as tomorrow. Cheap, nutritious enough, the best he could manage. Lily looked up from her worksheet, hands moving with a question he dreaded. "Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" Ethan's throat tightened. She was 7. She understood more than she should. He signed back, forcing a smile. "How about egg sandwiches, your favorite?" Lily's face showed she knew the truth, knew there wasn't money for pizza, knew not to push. She just nodded, signing back with forced brightness. "Okay, I love your eggs." After dinner, after washing dishes in the chip sink that never drained quite right, Ethan pulled out the envelope marked rent in black marker. Inside, $347 in cash tips and loose bills accumulated over weeks. He needed $1,600 for rent, $850 for tuition. Total required $2,450. Total available $347. He had 3 night shifts this week at the cafe. $15 an hour for 8 hours each minus taxes. $135. 2 mechanic shifts on the weekend at $22 an hour. Another $176. Even with perfect attendance, perfect tips, perfect everything, he'd still be $1,792 short. The business cards sat on the table where he'd left it. Vivian Ashford, CEO, Nextline Technologies. On the back, handwritten in elegant script, "Please consider $85 an hour." If he worked 30 hours a week, that would be $2,550. Enough for rent, tuition, groceries that weren't just eggs and wilting vegetables. Enough to fix the heating so Lily didn't sleep in 2 sweaters. Enough to breathe. But this was Nextline, the company that killed Grace. The company whose executives had threatened his wife, buried her warnings, erased evidence to protect quarterly earnings. If he accepted this offer, wouldn't he be betraying everything Grace died trying to fix? He looked at the photo on the shelf. Grace smiling, radiant, holding baby Lily against her chest. The image blurred as tears came, the kind he only allowed when Lily was asleep. "Grace," he whispered to the empty kitchen, "tell me what to do." The photo didn't answer. It never did. Across the city in a penthouse on the 42nd floor overlooking Elliott Bay, Vivian Ashford stood at floor-to-ceiling windows and watched lights glitter across black water. Her apartment was minimalist, all white walls and steel furniture and empty spaces that echoed when she walked. No photos, no personal items, nothing that suggested a human being lived here instead of a carefully maintained corporate asset. She'd taken off her hearing aids the moment she walked through the door, setting them in their charging case with the precision of ritual. Silence settled over her like a heavy blanket, the kind that suffocates if you let it. She poured whiskey into a crystal tumbler. Macallan, 18 years old, $300 a bottle. sat on the white leather sofa without relaxing, spine straight, knees together, like she was still in a boardroom, waiting for judgment. One tear fell, then another. She didn't wipe them away, just let them run down her face while the city sparkled below, indifferent to everything she couldn't say. 6 months ago, her father had died. Harrison Ashford, founder of Nextline Technologies, architect of an empire built on innovation and ruthlessness in equal measure. 66 years old, reduced to bones and pain in a hospital bed, cancer eating him from the inside out. She'd sat beside him during those final hours, holding his hand, while machines beeped their steady countdown. He'd looked at her with eyes still sharp, despite the morphine voice weak but demanding. "Vivian, don't you dare cry. Ashfords don't cry. If you can't be strong, you don't deserve this company." She'd held back the tears, then trained like a ball not to show weakness. He'd spent 33 years teaching her that power was the only voice people respected. Never show vulnerability. Never apologize. Never let them see you struggle. He died 15 minutes later, and she'd sat there beside his cooling body without shedding a single tear. Later, alone in this penthouse, she'd cried for 3 days straight, mourning a father who'd loved her the only way he knew how, by turning her into something hard enough to survive. 23 years earlier, she'd been 10 years old, sitting in her mother's chemistry lab doing homework, while Elaine Ashford worked late on some experiment that couldn't wait. Harrison had called, demanding results. Pressuring. Always pressuring. The reaction went wrong. Vivian remembered the sound, the terrible sharp crack that came before everything went silent. The explosion killed her mother instantly, shattered Vivian's eardrum, and damaged the nerves beyond repair. 2 weeks later, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and failure, a doctor told Harrison his daughter would need hearing aids for life. Harrison's response hadn't been to comfort her. It had been to ask whether anyone knew she was deaf. "I don't want anyone to know. She'll learn to speak clearly. No one can know Ashfords have weaknesses." So Vivian learned sign language in secret, taught by private tutors who were paid well and sworn to silence. In public, she wore expensive hearing aids and spoke with perfect enunciation, hiding disability like it was shame instead of simple fact. For 23 years, she'd hidden. For 23 years, she'd been exactly what her father demanded: cold, controlled, powerful, alone. Today had been the first time in 2 decades she'd signed with someone who wasn't a paid professional. That man in the coffee shop with his worn apron and careful hands had treated her like a person. His daughter had smiled at her with pure joy, no pity, no awkwardness, just a child seeing someone like herself. It had felt like breathing after years underwater. Vivian stood and walked to her home office, still perfectly organized despite the late hour. She pulled out cream, stationery, expensive stock that felt substantial under her fingers and began to write by hand. Not an email, not a text, a letter. Something personal in a world that had forgotten personalization. She wrote about the AI project, about needing someone who understood silence, about flexible hours and fair pay, and building something that mattered. She wrote to Ethan Carter, though she didn't yet know his full story, didn't know she was writing to a man whose wife her company had killed. She sealed the envelope, addressed it carefully, and set it aside for delivery tomorrow. Then she sat in the dark, hearing aids still off, wrapped in silence that was supposed to be peaceful but felt like drowning. "Dad," she whispered to the empty room, to the ghost that haunted every decision. "Did you ever feel this alone?" The silence didn't answer. 2 days later, Vivian walked into Harbor Grounds wearing jeans and a gray sweater, hair down, instead of pulled back in that severe twist. She looked almost normal, almost like someone who might smile without calculation. Ethan was restocking cups behind the counter when she entered. His whole body went rigid, shoulders tensing like he was preparing for a fight. She crossed to him, placed the cream envelope on the counter, and signed without speaking. "Please read when you have time." Before he could respond, Lily burst from the back room, pink jacket, bouncing facelit with recognition. She ran to Vivian, signing with the enthusiasm only children possess. "You came back. Do you like coffee? My dad makes the best coffee in Seattle." Vivian knelt down to Lily's level and her face transformed. The CEO mask fell away, replaced by something genuine and surprised and almost childlike itself. "I'm sure he does. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily, like the flower. What's yours?" "Vivian, and yes, I love coffee, especially when kind people make it." Ethan watched this exchange with something complicated moving across his face. suspicion, curiosity, something that might have been the first crack in 3 years of armor. Vivian stood signed to Ethan one more time. I hope you'll consider my offer. No pressure. She bought her oat milk latte, left a $20 bill for a $5 drink, and walked back out into Seattle's perpetual gray. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten in elegant script, each word carefully formed. He read it twice, then a third time, hearing the desperation hidden under professional language. $85 an hour, flexible schedule. Building something that could help children like Lily, like every deaf person who'd been dismissed and ignored and treated as less than human. But also Nextline Technologies, Harrison Ashford's empire. The company that had threatened Grace, that had weaponized Lily's medical needs to silence a whistleblower, that had let Grace die to protect profit margins. Ethan looked at Grace's photo on the shelf, then at the letter, then at the drawer where $347 wouldn't be enough for anything that mattered. Listen with your heart. Grace had said that to him 1,000 times when he was angry, when he was scared, when he didn't know which path to take. Listen with your heart. But what did his heart say when the enemy offered salvation? The next morning, Lily sat across from him at the tiny kitchen table, eating oatmeal with banana slices because that's what they could afford. She looked up from her bowl eyes too, knowing for 7 years. Dad, why do you look sad when you see the pretty lady? Ethan's hands stilled mid-sign. What do you mean, sweetheart? Your eyes get dark, like when you look at Mom's picture too long. She was right. Lily always saw what he tried to hide. He put down his spoon, met her eyes, decided she deserved truth even when truth was complicated. That lady, Vivian, runs a big company, the same company where Mommy worked. Lily's face went very still, processing. So she knew Mommy. No, the word hurt to sign. But her company made the car that hurt Mommy. Lily absorbed this in silence, 20 seconds that felt like hours. Then her small hands moved with a wisdom that shouldn't belong to second graders. But Dad, Vivian was nice to me. She smiled real smiles, not fake smiles like people at the store. Ethan started to respond, but Lily wasn't finished. Maybe she doesn't know about the bad thing. Maybe. You always say brave people fix things, not break things. Lily's hands were gentle, patient, teaching him the lesson he'd tried to teach her. Maybe this time, you can fix what hurt us. The words landed like physical blows. Fix instead of break. Heal instead of rage. Build something that honored Grace's memory instead of drowning in the grief of her absence. Ethan pulled Lily into a hug, felt her small arms wrap around his neck. When did you get so smart? I learned from Mommy and you. That afternoon, during his break at Harbor Grounds, Ethan crossed to the corner table where Vivian sat pretending to read a book. She looked up as he approached, something vulnerable flickering behind her careful composure. He sat down without asking permission. Why me? You can hire anyone with better credentials. Vivian's hands moved as she spoke, signing and speaking simultaneously in a way that felt natural, uncontrived. I've hired anyone for 5 years, engineers with PhDs from MIT and Stanford. They build systems that pass tests but fail humans. And you think I'm different? You signed to your daughter before signing to me. That told me everything. Her green eyes held his. You understand technology should serve people, not metrics. Ethan laughed, bitter sound cutting through cafe noise. Your company didn't always think that way. Confusion crossed her face, genuine and unguarded. What do you mean? The moment stretched. Ethan could walk away, could refuse, could protect himself and Lily from this woman whose family name was carved into his nightmares. Instead, he told the truth. My wife, Grace Carter, worked at Nextline 3 years ago. She died because your autonomous vehicle malfunctioned. She'd warned your team, but no one listened. All color drained from Vivian's face. Her hands went to the table edge, gripping like she needed something solid to keep from falling. Grace Carter. The name came out strangled. I remember seeing her name in memorial emails, but I didn't know details. I was head of marketing back then, not involved in the autonomous vehicle division. Ethan stood, chair scraping loud against worn floor. I can't work for the company that killed my wife. I'm sorry. Wait. Vivian was signing desperately now, words tumbling over each other. Please, I didn't know. If what you're saying is true, I need to know what happened. The door chimed. Lily burst in pink jacket bright against afternoon gray face lighting when she saw them both. She ran to Vivian, signed with pure concern. "Are you okay? You look sad." Vivian knelt down, struggling visibly to keep composure. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just talking about hard things with your dad." Lily turned to Ethan, hands moving with the confidence of someone who knew her father better than he knew himself. "Dad, are you going to help her?" "Lily, it's complicated." But Lily looked at Vivian, then back at Ethan. "My dad is the bravest person. If you need help, he'll help you." "Right, Dad." Ethan looked at his daughter, 7 years old and wiser than he'd ever be. He looked at the silver bracelet on his wrist, Grace's last gift, her final instruction. He looked at Vivian, seeing genuine shock and confusion, and something that might have been fear. His hands moved before his brain caught up. "1 week trial, but I need full transparency about what happened to Grace." Relief washed over Vivian's face like rain breaking through drought. "You have my word, I'll find out everything. And if I discover you knew and covered it up, I won't just quit. I'll make sure the whole world knows." Vivian met his eyes, didn't flinch. "I understand, and I deserve it." Monday morning arrived cold and gray, typical Seattle spring that couldn't decide between seasons. Ethan and Lily stood outside Nextline Tower, 52 stories of glass and steel stabbing into low clouds. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and LED screens displaying stock prices and corporate achievements, everything designed to intimidate. Employees rushed past in $1,000 suits carrying laptops that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, speaking in acronyms he'd forgotten during 3 years of survival. He felt every worn thread in his jacket, every scuff on his shoes, every way he didn't belong. Lily gripped his hand tighter, eyes wide, as she took in the gleaming surfaces and the hum of voices echoing off high ceilings. Vivian met them at the elevator, transformed back into CEO armor. Navy blazer sharp enough to cut pencil skirt, heels that added 4 inches of authority. Hair pulled back, severe. But when she saw Lily, something softened. She knelt down to the girl's level. "I'm glad you came, Lily. Are you excited?" "A little scared. Big buildings make me feel small." Vivian's smile was swift and knowing. "They make me feel small too sometimes." The 15th floor housed the AAI research lab, all open space and standing desks and whiteboards covered in equations Ethan recognized from another lifetime. Vivian had set aside a private office for them, equipped with dual monitors and adjustable furniture. In one corner, a kid's space with books and art supplies and a tablet loaded with educational games, beanbag chair, pink as Lily's jacket. The other employees watched with poorly concealed curiosity and suspicion. Eyes followed Ethan down hallways. Whispers started and stopped as he passed. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead AI researcher, met them with professional skepticism carved into her expression. 40-years-old Chinese-American PhD from Berkeley, and the confidence that came with earned expertise. "Vivian, with all respect, we need someone with recent industry experience. Mr. Carter hasn't published in 3 years." Ethan felt the old defensiveness rising, the shame that came from being judged for survival. "I've been busy raising my daughter." Sarah's face shifted immediately, realizing her mistake. "I apologize. That was insensitive. Welcome to the team." The development team proved harder. 4 engineers between 26 and 35, the kind who'd never worried about rent or medical bills or whether their child would eat tomorrow. Jake, 28 and wearing a hoodie that probably cost $300, looked at Ethan like he was a puzzle that didn't belong. "So you're like a consultant. What do you actually do?" "I test whether your system helps people or just passes benchmarks." "We have QA for that." Sarah cut in, voice sharp. "Jake, Mr. Carter is here because our system has 73% accuracy. That's failing grade in the real world where people need to be understood." Jake shut up, but Ethan saw the resentment simmering, the gossip that would start the moment he left the room. Lily tugged his sleeve, signing with the blunt honesty children wield like weapons. "That boy doesn't like us. He doesn't know us yet." Ethan spent the first day reviewing code, analyzing algorithms that should have been better. The ASL recognition system failed with regional variations, couldn't handle fast signers, missed emotional context entirely. Problems he could fix given time and resources and the space to work without proving his worth every 5 minutes. Lily charmed the office despite initial skepticism. She showed her drawings to Sarah, who laughed at a picture of Ethan with cape and lightning bolts. She asked questions that made engineers uncomfortable. What's an algorithm? Why do computers need to learn? Can they dream at 4 in the afternoon? Vivian stopped by still in CEO mode, but with something softer around the edges. How's your first day? Your system needs 6 months minimum of work, but it's fixable. Relief crossed her face, genuine and unguarded for just a moment. That's what I needed to hear, not "it's great" from people afraid to tell me truth. She left. Ethan went back to code, to problems he could solve with logic instead of emotion. At 5:30, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Carter. The voice was male-controlled, familiar, in a way that made Ethan's skin crawl. This is Marcus Hale, COO of Nextline. We need to talk. Before Ethan could respond, his office door opened. A man stepped in without knocking, tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and eyes like winter ice. Custom suit that probably cost $4,000. Watch that could pay Ethan's rent for 6 months. Marcus Hale, the man whose name was all over Grace's emails, the man who'd buried her warnings, the man who'd let her die. I wanted to meet you in person. Marcus's voice was calm, professional, hiding whatever churned underneath. I know who you are, Mr. Carter. I know what you think we did to your wife, and I want you to understand something before this goes any further. Ethan stood, every muscle tense. You want to threaten me? Go ahead. I've got nothing left to lose. I'm not here to threaten you. Marcus looked past Ethan to where Lily was coloring, oblivious to adult tensions. I'm here to tell you the truth. Grace Carter was brilliant. I trained her myself, taught her everything I knew about AI development. When she brought concerns about the AV7 system, I listened. I believed her. Then why did you bury her reports? Because Harrison Ashford gave me a choice. Marcus's face showed something that might have been pain or might have been excellent acting. We had $800 million in pre-orders. If we delayed launch, investors would pull out. The company would collapse. 3,000 employees would lose their jobs. My wife had just been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I needed the promotion, the salary increase, the insurance coverage that would keep her alive. He stepped closer, voice dropping low so Lily wouldn't hear. So yes, I chose my family and 3,000 other families over your wife's warnings. I made a calculation. Grace's data wasn't definitive enough to justify destroying everything we'd built. I was wrong. The system failed. Grace died. I live with that choice every single day. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. You think that makes it better? You think I care about your guilt? No, I think you should know I'm not a monster. I'm just a man who made an impossible choice and has to live with the consequences. Marcus turned toward the door, then looked back. And I think you should ask yourself, what are you really doing here? Are you trying to help deaf children? Or are you trying to destroy the company that killed your wife? Because those are very different missions, Mr. Carter. And only one of them honors Grace's memory. He left. The door clicked shut. Ethan stood there, shaking rage and confusion and something worse, something that felt like doubt. Lily appeared beside him, signing careful questions. Dad, who was that man? Someone who hurt Mommy. Is he going to hurt us? Ethan knelt down, pulled his daughter close. No one is going to hurt you, I promise. But even as he signed the words, he wondered if he could keep that promise in a building where every wall hid secrets and every smile might be calculation. That evening, Vivian sat in her penthouse with her laptop open, searching through archived files with access credentials only the CEO possessed. She found Grace Carter's employment record. Exceptional performance reviews until suddenly, March 2021, everything changed. Does not align with company vision. Reassigned to different projects. Buried. She found email trails, dozens of them. Grace's careful documentation of safety concerns met with Marcus's dismissive responses and eventually silence. She found the deletion orders, the cover-up documented in corporate efficiency, every step planned and executed. Her father's signature was on half the memos. Vivian sat in the dark, hearing aids off, wrapped in silence that felt like drowning. She picked up her phone, dialed a number she hadn't called in 6 months. Richard Brennan answered on the second ring, voice rough with age and retired comfort. Vivian, it's late. I need to see you tonight, off the record. Silence on the other end. then a sigh that carried years of complicated history. It's about Grace Carter, isn't it? You know, I quit over it. Your father asked me to help bury evidence. I refused. 3 months later, I was retired early with a generous severance and an NDA I never signed, but also never violated. Richard's voice went gentle. Come over. We'll talk. Vivian drove through rain to Richard's house in Capitol Hill, old craftsman, that smelled like books and coffee and the kind of comfort she'd never known. He handed her tea. She didn't drink, then pulled a USB drive from his desk drawer. I kept copies. Your father would have destroyed me if he'd known. But he's dead now. And you need to know what you're inheriting. The files were worse than Vivian had imagined. Email from Harrison threatening Grace's daughter, threatening her insurance coverage, weaponizing disability against a mother who'd tried to save lives, internal memos ordering deletion of evidence, phone recordings of Harrison and Marcus planning the cover-up with cold efficiency. By the time she finished reading, Vivian was crying tears she couldn't control streaming down her face. My father was a monster. He was a man who chose profit over people. Richard's voice was kind despite the harsh truth. But you're not him, Vivian. You can be better. I knew something was wrong, I suspected, and I did nothing because I was too scared to disappoint him. You were 29 grieving your mother, terrified of the only parent you had left. Richard poured more tea. Neither of them would drink. That doesn't make you guilty. It makes you human. The question is, what will you do now? Vivian looked at the files, at the evidence of everything her father had built on lies and blood. I'm going to tell Ethan everything. And then I'm going to fix this. Marcus won't let you. He controls 7 of the 11 board votes. If you move against him, he'll remove you as CEO. Then I'll fight. Richard smiled, sad and proud. Your father taught you to be strong. But real strength isn't hiding who you are. It's showing the world what they tried to break couldn't be broken. The next morning, Vivian arrived at Nextline early before most employees, before the building filled with people who would judge and gossip and turn her confession into entertainment. She went to Ethan's office where he was already working Lily asleep in the kids' corner with a blanket Sarah Chen must have provided. Vivian closed the door, locked it, removed her hearing aids and set them on the desk with deliberate care. She signed without speaking. I need to tell you something about Grace, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide whether to stay or leave. She showed him the USB drive, the emails, the threats, the recordings. Everything her father and Marcus had done, every calculation that valued profit over human life. Ethan watched in silence, jaw clenched, hands trembling. When the final recording ended, Harrison's voice still echoing with orders to bury truth, Ethan stood and walked to the window. Your father threatened Lily. He knew she needed medical care and weaponized it against Grace. I didn't know, Vivian's voice broke. I swear I didn't know the details. I was running marketing, not operations. I wasn't in those meetings. But you suspected something. The accusation landed clean and true. Yes, I suspected. And I did nothing because I was a coward. Long silence. Seattle spread below them, city of rain and tech money and people trying to survive both. Why are you showing me this now? You could have buried it again. Because you deserve truth, and because I don't want to be my father. You can't bring Grace back. No, but I can make sure Marcus doesn't get away with it, and I can make sure Nextline never kills anyone again. Ethan turned from the window, met her eyes. If we do this, Marcus will destroy us both. He has lawyers, money, board members loyal to him. Are you willing to lose everything? I already lost everything that mattered when I became the person my father wanted instead of the person I am. I have nothing left to lose. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, the first crack in 3 years of armor. Then let's find proof. Not just emails, but system logs, test footage, everything Marcus thinks he deleted. How Creighton, small smile, first real one she'd seen from him. I'm a software engineer. There's always backup somewhere. For 2 weeks, they worked in secret, Ethan accessing archived servers with CEO credentials Vivian provided, finding folders Marcus thought he'd buried. 183 emails from Grace. Test footage showing vehicles failing to stop in rain. Internal memos documenting the cover-up with corporate efficiency. Ethan copied everything to an external drive, backed it up in 3 locations, prepared for the war he knew was coming. Vivian met quietly with board members who might support truth over loyalty. Patricia Okafor, former MIT dean, who'd always pushed for ethics. James Whitmore, investor, whose niece had died in a Nextline crash. Sandra Yee, CFO, who'd been excluded from Harrison's inner circle. They promised support, but Marcus controlled 7 votes. Even with allies, Vivian would lose any direct confrontation. Then we go public before he can move against us, Vivian decided. Force his hand with evidence too damning to ignore. But Marcus was already moving. The IT director appeared in Marcus's office on a Wednesday morning, face pale with the kind of nervousness that came from delivering bad news to powerful men. Marcus was reviewing quarterly projections numbers that looked good on paper, but would mean nothing if what he suspected was true. Sir, someone accessed the H drive using CEO credentials. 87 gigabytes downloaded 2 weeks ago. Marcus's pen stopped moving. The room got very quiet. When exactly? April 14th, 3:47 a.m. Vivian. Of course it was Vivian. Marcus had watched her transform over the past month, watched her spend time with Ethan Carter, watched her ask questions she'd never asked before. He'd hoped she wouldn't dig. He'd been wrong. Thank you. That will be all. The IT director left quickly, grateful to escape. Marcus sat alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt like prison bars. On his desk, a framed photo of his wife Jennifer and their 2 children, smiling at some beach vacation before cancer and chemotherapy and impossible choices. He picked up his phone, dialed a number he had hoped never to use. This is Marcus Hale. I need crisis management. Immediately. Over the next week, rumors began to spread through Nextline's corridors like poison through bloodstream. Whispers in break rooms, knowing looks in elevators. Someone had seen Vivian and Ethan having coffee together outside the office. Someone else claimed they'd worked late together multiple times. The photos appeared on a tech gossip blog carefully cropped to suggest intimacy where there was only conversation. Jake from the development team cornered Ethan in the hallway, uncomfortable but not unkind. Dude, people are saying you and Vivian are, Ethan's jaw tightened. We're not. We're working. I believe you, but others don't. Just be careful, man. Office politics here are brutal. Lily overheard 2 employees talking outside Ethan's office later that week, their voices carrying through the door they had left slightly open. She was in the kids' corner, supposedly focused on coloring, but she'd learned to read lips better than most people realized. Poor kid. Her dad's using her to get close to the CEO. That's disgusting. Who brings a child to work as a prop? When Ethan came back from a meeting, Lily's face was carefully neutral, the way children look when they're trying not to show hurt. Her hands moved slowly. Dad, am I a prop? The question hit like a fist to the stomach. What? No, who said that? People at the office. They say you use me to make Vivian like you. Fury rose hot and immediate, but Ethan forced it down, forced himself to focus on what mattered. He knelt in front of his daughter, took her small hands in his. Sweetheart, some people say mean things because they're scared of change. You are not a prop. You're my daughter, and I love you more than anything in this world. Lily nodded, but the hurt didn't leave her eyes completely. 7 years old and already learning that people could be cruel in ways that had nothing to do with truth. That Friday evening, Marcus sat in his home office while Jennifer slept upstairs, recovering from another round of treatment that left her exhausted and nauseated. He logged into Nextline's system, remotely navigated to folders he'd tried to forget existed. The H drive. Everything he and Harrison had buried. Every email from Grace, every test result showing the AV7's failures, every piece of evidence that could destroy everything. His hands shook as he typed deletion commands. The screen prompted for confirmation. One keystroke, and it would all disappear, every trace of the guilt he carried like stones in his pockets. He thought of Grace Carter, brilliant and passionate, and right about everything she'd warned them about. He thought of Ethan and Lily trying to survive in a world that had taken their wife and mother. He thought of the 3,000 employees who depended on Nextline for their livelihoods, their health insurance, their futures. Then he thought of Jennifer upstairs alive because of the salary and benefits this job had provided, because he'd made a choice to save her instead of being honest. Marcus hit enter. The screen flickered. Deletion complete. He closed his laptop and poured whiskey. He wouldn't drink, just held the glass and stared at nothing. Across the city, Ethan's laptop chimed with an alert he'd set up weeks ago. He checked the notification, saw what Marcus had done, and smiled without humor. "Too late," he said to the empty apartment. "I copied everything 3 weeks ago." The external drive was hidden at Richard Brennan's house, backed up in cloud storage under an alias prepared for exactly this moment. Marcus had just proven he was still covering up, still destroying evidence, still choosing protection over truth. On Monday morning, Marcus called an emergency board meeting. 11 members gathered in the conference room on the 40th floor. Seattle's skyline spread behind them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Vivian arrived expecting routine quarterly review, dressed in her CEO armor, prepared for normal corporate theater. Marcus stood at the head of the table, her seat, and Vivian knew immediately something had shifted. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've called this meeting to address concerns about our CEO's recent conduct and judgment." The PowerPoint presentation was professional, devastating, designed to destroy with plausible deniability. Photos of Vivian and Ethan together cropped to suggest romance instead of investigation. Records of after-hours access to sensitive files. Implications of impropriety wrapped in corporate concern. "I believe Ms. Ashford is emotionally compromised. Her hiring of Mr. Carter shows questionable judgment. Her access to restricted files without board notification raises concerns about her decision-making capacity." Marcus's voice was steady, reasonable, the voice of someone who cared deeply about the company's well-being. "I recommend a temporary leave of absence for her own good and the good of Nextline." Patricia Okafor stood immediately. "This is character assassination disguised as concern. Vivian has done nothing wrong." James Whitmore nodded agreement. "These photos prove nothing except two people having coffee. The file access was within her rights as CEO." But Marcus's 7 loyalists sat silent, their votes already decided before the meeting began. The motion passed 7-3 with one abstention. Vivian was removed as CEO effective immediately. Marcus was named interim CEO pending further review. Vivian stood, collected her files with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't look Marcus in the eye. "This isn't over." Marcus's expression showed something that might have been regret. "Vivian, you need rest. We all understand grief affects judgment. Take time to heal." She wanted to scream that she wasn't grieving, wasn't compromised, wasn't anything except finally awake after 33 years of sleepwalking. Instead, she walked out with her head high past employees who wouldn't meet her eyes through a building that suddenly felt like foreign territory. Security came for Ethan that afternoon while he was reviewing code, Lily doing homework in the corner. 2 guards in uniforms that were supposed to look professional but felt like violence. "Mr. Carter, your access has been terminated. Please collect your belongings." Lily looked up from her math worksheet, saw the guards, saw her father's face go hard and closed. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Ethan forced calm into his hands as he signed back. "No, sweetheart, we just have to leave." Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway, guilt written across her features. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I tried to speak up, but..." "It's okay, Sarah. This isn't your fight." But it was everyone's fight whether they knew it or not. Every engineer who'd stayed silent while safety concerns were buried. Every executive who'd prioritized quarterly earnings over human lives. Every employee who'd accepted comfortable salaries while the company they worked for killed people and covered it up. Marcus stood in the hallway as security escorted Ethan out, blocking the path like he had something more to say. "You shouldn't have come here, Carter." Ethan stopped, looked at the man who'd been his wife's mentor and her executioner. "You killed Grace. Now you're covering it up again." Marcus's voice dropped low, meant only for Ethan. "I didn't kill her. The system failed. I made a business decision to protect 3,000 jobs. If we'd recalled vehicles, Nextline would have collapsed. Investors would have pulled out. Mass layoffs." His eyes flicked to Lily, then back. "So yes, I chose 3,000 families over Grace's life. I live with that choice every single day. You think that makes you noble? You're just a coward who calls his cowardice pragmatism. And you think you're what, a martyr? You're using your daughter as an emotional shield while you attack a company that employs thousands of people." Marcus stepped closer. "What happens to them when you destroy Nextline? What happens to the families who depend on paychecks you want to eliminate?" Ethan wanted to hit him, wanted to wipe that reasonable expression off his face. But Lily was watching, and violence would prove Marcus right about everything. Heroes face consequences. You're just good at making other people pay for your choices. Security escorted them out while employees watched from cubicles and offices, some sympathetic, most just grateful it wasn't them. Lily held Ethan's hand tight as they walked through the lobby, past the LED screens, showing stock prices that would mean nothing when the truth came out. On the street, rain is starting again because, of course, it was. Lily looked up at her father. Did we lose Dad? Ethan knelt down on wet pavement, didn't care about his jeans getting soaked. Not yet, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war. That night, Vivian sat in her penthouse, surrounded by evidence that didn't matter anymore. Power she'd lost, a company she'd inherited and could no longer control. She'd called Richard, Patricia, James, Sandra. They'd promised support, but support without authority was just sympathy. Her phone rang. Ethan. Are you okay? His voice was tired, stripped of pretense. I just lost my job, again, because of your company, again. The accusation wasn't unfair. Vivian closed her eyes, let the guilt wash over her. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated Marcus would retaliate. What do we do now? She looked at the city below, thousands of lights representing thousands of people who had no idea their transportation company was built on lies and death. We fight, I'm not giving up. Easy for you to say. You have a penthouse. I'm 3 weeks from eviction. The words cut because they were true. Vivian had safety nets Ethan couldn't imagine. She'd never worried about rent, never counted coins for groceries, never had to choose between her child's medication and keeping the lights on. I'll wire you $10,000 tonight for Lily's expenses. Silence on the other end, heavy with pride and desperation warring. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's investment. We need you in this fight. More silence, then quietly, okay, for Lily, not for me. After he hung up, Vivian transferred the money and sat in the dark, wondering when she'd become someone who could solve problems by throwing cash at them, while the people she'd hurt struggled just to survive. The next morning, she met with Richard, Patricia, and James at Richard's house, away from Nextline's cameras and Marcus's spies. They spread documents across his dining table, evidence of crimes that should have destroyed careers, but would more likely destroy whistleblowers. Patricia studied the emails, face grave. This is damning, but without physical evidence from the H drive, Marcus's lawyers will claim it's fabricated. Ethan made backups before Marcus deleted the server. We have everything. James leaned back, thinking like the investor he was. Even with evidence, Marcus controls the board. You can't vote him out. Then we go public. Force their hand with exposure they can't control. Richard, who'd seen enough corporate battles to know how they ended, looked at Vivian with something like fatherly concern. If you do this, you'll likely lose everything. The board will paint you as unstable, vindictive, a grieving daughter lashing out. Marcus will spin this as corporate sabotage. Your reputation will be destroyed. My reputation was built on my father's crimes. Maybe it deserves to be destroyed. And the 3,000 employees who depend on Nextline for their livelihoods. What happens to them when the company collapses under the weight of scandal? The question landed heavy. Vivian hadn't thought about the collateral damage, the innocent people who'd had nothing to do with Harrison's choices or Marcus's cover-up, but would suffer anyway. Then we have to expose the truth in a way that forces reform instead of destruction. Make the company accountable without killing it. Patricia nodded slowly. The annual shareholder meeting is in 3 weeks. 500 shareholders, press, investors. If you present evidence there publicly, Marcus can't suppress it. He'll try to bar me from attending. You still own 18% of shares. He can't legally exclude you from a shareholder meeting. A plan began to take shape. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to gather every piece of evidence, every witness, every fact that could withstand scrutiny. 3 weeks to figure out how to honor Grace's memory without destroying the lives of thousands of people who'd had no idea their company was built on buried bodies. Ethan spent those weeks working from his cramped apartment laptop on the kitchen table while Lily did homework beside him. He reached out to former Nextline engineers who'd left for ethical reasons, people who'd tried to speak up and been silenced or pushed out. Dr. Yuki Tanaka responded immediately from her new position at a university. I left because Harrison Ashford told me to sign off on the AV7 launch despite my concerns. When I refused, I was reassigned to projects that didn't matter until I quit. I'll testify if you need me. Miguel Reyes, who'd been blacklisted from the tech industry after trying to report safety violations, wrote back with barely contained fury. I lost my career trying to do the right thing. Harrison threatened my family. Told me if I went public, he'd make sure my wife lost her work visa. I'll tell anyone who'll listen what that company did to people like us. One by one, voices emerged from the silence Harrison and Marcus had imposed. Engineers who'd seen the test results, managers who'd been ordered to delete files, employees who'd quit rather than be complicit. Vivian worked the corporate side, hiring investigative journalists, preparing legal documentation, building a case that could withstand the army of lawyers Marcus would deploy. She sold her art collection, liquidated investments, pulled together resources for the legal battle ahead. Richard filed a complaint with the FBI, providing enough evidence to trigger an official investigation. Federal agents began reviewing files, interviewing witnesses, building criminal cases that moved on timelines measured in months and years. But they didn't have months. They had 3 weeks until the shareholder meeting. One chance to expose everything before Marcus consolidated power completely. Lily watched her father work late into the night, saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the way his hands moved slower when he thought she wasn't looking. "Dad, are you okay?" He looked up from spreadsheets documenting vehicle failures, evidence of death compiled into cells and rows. "Just tired, sweetheart." "Is this about Mom?" Ethan stopped, really looked at his daughter. 7 years old, and she understood more than he gave her credit for. "Yes. I'm trying to make sure what happened to her doesn't happen to anyone else." Lily climbed into his lap, small arms around his neck. "Mom would be proud of you." The words broke something in him. He held his daughter and cried for the first time since Grace's funeral, tears that had been building for 3 years, finally finding release. "I miss her so much." "Me too. But we still have each other." Such simple truth from someone so young. They still had each other. That had to be enough. The night before the shareholder meeting, Vivian couldn't sleep. She stood at her windows, watching the city, preparing for the performance that would either redeem her father's legacy or destroy it completely. She'd written her speech entirely in sign language, refusing to hide anymore, refusing to pretend she was something she wasn't. The AI translation system Ethan had improved would convert her signs to voice in real-time, broadcasting to 500 people, and however many more watched the live stream. Her phone buzzed, text from Ethan. "Are you ready?" She typed back with shaking hands. "No, but we're doing it anyway." That's what bravery looks like. She thought about that. Bravery wasn't absence of fear. It was doing the right thing even when terror tried to freeze you in place. Grace had been brave. Ethan was brave. Even Lily, facing a world that didn't always accommodate her needs, was brave. Maybe Vivian could be brave too. The Seattle Convention Center's grand ballroom could hold 1,000 people, but today only 500 filled the seats. Shareholders in expensive suits, financial analysts with tablets and spreadsheets, journalists hoping for news that didn't exist yet. Marcus stood at the podium delivering opening remarks, voice smooth and confident, numbers impressive when stripped of context. Nextline has achieved record growth this quarter. $4.2 billion in revenue, 23% year-over-year increase. Our autonomous vehicle division continues to lead the industry in innovation and safety. Applause. Comfortable applause from comfortable people invested in comfort continuing. Then the doors in the back opened. Vivian walked down the center aisle in her red coat, the one she'd worn that first day at Harbor Grounds, armor disguised as vulnerability. Her hair was down instead of pulled back. She wore no hearing aids, nothing to hide the truth of who she was. Beside her, Ethan in his best clothes that still looked cheap compared to everyone else. And Lily wearing a t-shirt that said, "My mom was a hero," in letters bold enough to read from the stage. The room went silent. Marcus saw them and his face drained of color. Security moved to intercept, but Patricia Okafor stood from her seat. "Ms. Ashford owns 18% of Nextline shares. She has every right to attend this meeting." Marcus recovered quickly, professional smile sliding into place. "Of course. Vivian, there's seating available in the back." "I'm here to speak." She climbed onto the stage before anyone could stop her, positioned herself in front of the massive screen used for presentations. Ethan set up the laptop, connected it to the building's system, prepared the AI translation software they'd spent weeks perfecting. Vivian removed her coat, set it aside with careful precision, looked out at 500 faces watching with curiosity or confusion or dawning concern. Her hands began to move. No voice. Just signing clear and deliberate while behind her, the screen displayed her words in text and synthesized speech filled the ballroom. My name is Vivian Ashford. For 33 years, I hid my disability because I was taught that vulnerability is weakness. Today, I stand before you without hiding, and I'm about to tell you the truth about what this company did. Marcus tried to interrupt. Security, remove her. She's not authorized. But Patricia was on her feet again, joined by James and Sandra. She owns shares. She has the floor. Vivian continued signing words flowing like water breaking through a dam. 3 years ago, a woman named Grace Carter tried to save lives. She was a senior engineer in our autonomous vehicle division. She discovered a critical flaw in our braking algorithm. She warned us the vehicles were unsafe. My father and Marcus Hale silenced her. The screen behind her changed. Email appeared Harrison's words, stark and damning. Grace Carter is a liability. If she goes to press sue for NDA breach, she has a deaf daughter with expensive medical needs. She'll back down. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Journalists started typing frantically. Shareholders leaned forward, comfortable assumptions cracking. 2 months after my father threatened her daughter's medical coverage, Grace was killed by the vehicle she tried to fix. Another image. Grace Carter's photo smiling, holding baby Lily, beautiful and alive and gone. Then the screen shifted to video. Grace herself recorded 3 days before she died, sitting in her home office, looking exhausted, but determined. My name is Grace Carter. I'm recording this because I've been threatened into silence. I want the truth documented before something happens to me. The video played, Grace explaining the technical failures, showing test footage of vehicles failing to stop, detailing her attempts to report the problem and the retaliation she'd faced. Then the hidden camera footage from Harrison's office. Marcus standing silent while Harrison threatened Grace weaponized her daughter, made protecting his company's reputation more important than protecting human lives. The ballroom erupted, shareholders shouting questions, journalists rushing toward the stage, camera flashes turning the moment into documentation that couldn't be erased. Marcus tried to speak, tried to take control of the narrative collapsing around him. This footage is out of context. Ms. Ashford is emotionally unstable, manipulating, but FBI agents were already standing moving forward from where they'd been waiting in the back row. 3 of them in dark suits, badges, visible presence, transforming corporate theater into criminal proceeding. Marcus Hale, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, corporate fraud, and conspiracy to commit negligent homicide. And they read him his rights while 500 people watched, while cameras recorded, while the comfortable world of corporate immunity cracked open to show the rot underneath. Marcus didn't resist. He looked at Ethan standing beside Vivian on the stage, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just acknowledgement that they'd both made choices and now faced consequences. Vivian kept signing, kept speaking through synthesized voice, turning her moment of triumph into something bigger than revenge. This company failed. We put revenue over safety. We silenced whistleblowers. We destroyed families. I cannot undo what my father did. I cannot bring Grace Carter back, but I can make sure her death was not meaningless. She outlined the plans she and Patricia and Richard had built over 3 weeks. Full recall of every AV7 vehicle, estimated cost $600 million. Establishment of the Grace Carter Ethics Foundation, funded with $100 million from company reserves, dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and safety advocates. Independent oversight board staffed by outside experts with power to halt any launch that showed safety concerns. These actions will cost us billions. Our stock will drop. Some of you will lose money. But I would rather lead a company worth $1 billion that saves lives than one worth $4 billion built on lies. She ended by signing directly to the cameras, knowing this moment would be replayed, analyzed, turned into sound bites and arguments, in evidence in trials to come. Grace Carter tried to save lives. She was silenced. Today I give her back her voice, and I promise every family harmed by our negligence we will face what we've done. We will pay for our crimes. We will become the company we should have been from the beginning. Silence for 10 seconds. Then one person started clapping. Patricia Okafor, then James Whitmore, then Sandra Yee, then engineers who'd been forced to stay silent, shareholders who'd had enough of profit without principle, people who were tired of watching corporations destroy lives without consequence. Standing ovation. 500 people on their feet, applause. That sounded like thunder, like hope, like maybe the world could be better if enough people demanded it. Ethan stood beside Vivian Lilly, holding his hand, watching justice arrive, imperfect and incomplete, but real enough to matter. Marcus was led away in handcuffs. His wife and children watched from seats in the middle section, their faces showing devastation and confusion, and the particular pain of loving someone who'd done terrible things. Lily looked up at her father. "Did we win, Dad?" Ethan thought about that question. Marcus would probably serve minimal time, plea bargain his way to reduce charges, find some comfortable prison for white-collar criminals. The company wouldn't collapse, but would take years to rebuild trust. Grace was still dead, and no amount of justice would bring her back. We told the truth. Sometimes that has to be enough. The fallout came fast and merciless. Within 24 hours, Nextline's stock dropped 34%. Class action lawsuits piled up from families affected by AV7 crashes, each one demanding accountability that came with billion-dollar price tags. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into securities fraud, claiming the company had hidden material safety information from investors. News networks played Grace's video on loop. Her face became iconic, the engineer who'd tried to save lives and been destroyed for it. Ethan watched himself and Lily on television, that moment on stage, transformed into something larger than their private grief. Commentators debated corporate ethics and whistleblower protection. Politicians promised reforms they'd probably never pass. Marcus posted bail at $5 million, placed under house arrest with an ankle monitor while his lawyers began negotiating. They were good lawyers, the kind that turned federal charges into misdemeanors, 20-year sentences into supervised probation. Justice for men like Marcus usually meant embarrassment, not imprisonment. Patricia Okafor was named interim CEO, while the board conducted a search for permanent leadership. In her first act, she reinstated Vivian as special advisor, gave her an office and authority to rebuild what her father had broken. Vivian's second call went to Ethan. "I want you as director of AI ethics and safety, $85,000 base salary plus equity. Your job is to make sure we never hurt anyone again." Ethan sat in his cramped apartment, phone pressed to his ear, not quite believing what he was hearing. "You're offering me a permanent position. If you'll take it, we need people who understand the stakes aren't abstract. People who know technology serves humans, not shareholders." He looked around the studio apartment, the peeling paint and the heating that never worked right, the future of barely surviving, stretching ahead like a prison sentence. "Yes, I'll take it." "Good. Start Monday. And Ethan, bring Lily. We're making this company accessible, which means children of employees should be welcome." After she hung up, Ethan sat in silence, processing the shift from poverty to stability, from fighting against Nextline to building something better inside it. Grace would have approved. She'd always believed in fixing broken systems rather than abandoning them. Lily appeared from the bedroom, still in pajamas, though it was nearly noon. "Who was that, Vivian? She offered me a real job. Good money. Health insurance." Lily's face lit up with hope that broke his heart, because 7-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about health insurance. "Does that mean we can stay here? We don't have to move." They could do better than here. They could afford an actual apartment with heat and walls thick enough to provide privacy. But he understood what she was really asking. Would their life stop being a constant emergency? "We can stay in Seattle, maybe find a nicer place, with your own bedroom." She launched herself at him, small arms fierce around his neck, and Ethan held his daughter while something that felt like hope took root for the first time in 3 years. The criminal proceedings moved with bureaucratic slowness. Marcus's lawyers filed motion after motion, delaying trial, negotiating behind closed doors. The prosecution wanted to make an example, push for maximum sentences to send a message that corporate crimes carried real consequences. But they also knew juries often sympathized with defendants in suits, especially ones with families and good PR teams. 3 months after the shareholder meeting, a plea deal was offered. Marcus would plead guilty to obstruction of justice and corporate fraud, dropping the negligent homicide charge. 3 years in federal prison, $5 million in personal fines, permanent ban from corporate leadership. The prosecutor called Ethan before accepting. It's not what we wanted, but it guarantees conviction. Trial could take 2 years, and juries are unpredictable with white-collar crime. Ethan thought about Grace, about justice delayed becoming justice denied, about the practical reality that 3 years was better than nothing. Take it. The sentencing hearing happened on a cold October morning in federal court downtown. Ethan attended. Lily stayed home with a babysitter because some things children shouldn't witness. Marcus stood before the judge looking older than his 42 years, 30 pounds, lighter than 3 months ago, wearing humility like an ill-fitting suit. He read a prepared statement, voice steady despite everything. I destroyed Grace Carter's life to save my career and protect my family. I told myself I was making an impossible choice, that I was protecting jobs and keeping the company alive, but I was protecting myself. He looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Carter, I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know I think about Grace every single day. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends I can never fully make. The judge sentenced him to 3 years at a minimum security facility, eligible for early release in 18 months with good behavior. Marcus would serve time, but comfortable time, the kind that didn't break men so much as inconvenience them. Ethan watched Marcus led away and felt hollow. He'd wanted 20 years, wanted Marcus to suffer proportionally to the suffering he'd caused. But the legal system wasn't designed to deliver catharsis. It was designed to process crimes and move on, and sometimes justice looked more like compromise than vindication. Outside the courthouse, journalists surrounded him with microphones and questions that all boiled down to the same thing: was he satisfied? No, but satisfaction was never the point. The point was making sure it doesn't happen again. That quote would play on news networks for weeks, turned into a soundbite amid systemic reform versus individual punishment, the kind of philosophical debate that happened while actual people tried to survive actual consequences. Back at Nextline, now operating under federal oversight and independent safety review, Ethan built a team dedicated to preventing another Grace Carter. He hired engineers who'd left the company for ethical reasons, brought in outside experts who owed nothing to corporate loyalty, created systems where safety concerns couldn't be buried by executives worried about quarterly earnings. Lily became a fixture in the office, charming employees who'd initially viewed her with skepticism. She sat in on meetings asking questions that seemed simple, but cut to fundamental truths adults had learned to ignore. During a discussion about autonomous vehicle sensors, she interrupted with raised hand. If the car can't see in rain, why don't you just not drive it in rain? The senior engineer started to explain the complexity of weather detection and conditional programming, then stopped, realizing the 7-year-old had identified the core problem they'd been dancing around for an hour. Sometimes simplicity was wisdom, not ignorance. Sarah Chen, who'd stayed with Nextline despite the chaos, became Lily's unofficial mentor. She taught the girl basic coding during lunch breaks, showed her how to think in algorithms and logic trees. Your mom was one of the best engineers I ever worked with. She'd be proud of how smart you are. Lily beamed at the comparison, then her expression turned serious. I want to make things that help people like Mom did. Sarah met Ethan's eyes across the cafeteria, and something unspoken passed between them. Grace's legacy, living on through her daughter's tragedy, transformed into purpose, if they were careful and lucky, and refused to let grief become the final word. 6 months after the arrest, Vivian and Patricia announced the Grace Carter Foundation's first initiatives. $100 million distributed to programs supporting whistleblowers, funding safety research, providing legal protection for employees who reported corporate misconduct. The foundation's first scholarship went to a young engineer who'd been blacklisted for reporting safety violations at her previous company. She stood at the press conference, voice shaking but determined. Grace Carter lost her life telling the truth. This foundation says her sacrifice mattered, that speaking up is worth the risk. 27 other whistleblowers received support that year. Legal funds for lawsuits against retaliating employers. Salary replacement for those fired for reporting misconduct. Counseling for families torn apart by the stress of fighting corporations with infinite resources. The second initiative was harder, more personal. Medical support for families affected by corporate negligence, starting with the 47 families who'd lost loved ones in AV7 crashes. Nextline couldn't bring back the dead, but they could pay for therapy, cover funeral costs, establish trust funds for orphan children. Ethan received a call from a woman in Portland whose husband had died in an AB7 crash 2 years earlier. I blamed myself for not stopping him from buying that car. For 2 years, I thought I could have prevented it. Her voice broke. Knowing the company knew it was dangerous, knowing they chose not to fix it, I don't know if that makes it better or worse. But at least I know it wasn't my fault. Absolution from blame wasn't justice, but it was something. Small comfort measured against infinite loss, but comfort nonetheless. 8 months in Lily's school called about a specialized program for deaf students interested in science and technology. The tuition was substantial, but Nextline's education benefits now covered it completely. Ethan signed the enrollment forms remembering when $850 a month had been an impossible burden. Financial stability changed everything. He moved them to a 2-bedroom apartment in Ballard neighborhood with actual trees and coffee shops that weren't harbor grounds. Lily's room had a window facing west, catching sunset light that turned her drawings into stained glass. The heating worked. The walls were thick. They could breathe without counting every dollar. But comfort came with complications. Ethan found himself invited to tech industry conferences, asked to speak about ethics and corporate accountability. People wanted to hear from the man who'd exposed Nextline, wanted him to be the hero of a story that had no heroes, only survivors and casualties. He declined most invitations. This wasn't about him. It was about Grace, about every person who'd tried to do the right thing and been destroyed for it. Making it about his courage missed the point entirely. Vivian understood that instinct. They'd developed an odd friendship over the months built on shared trauma and mutual respect rather than easy compatibility. Once a week they met for coffee, sometimes talking business, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence that acknowledged how much they'd both lost. People keep asking if I'm dating anyone. Vivian's hands moved while she spoke code switching between ASL and English becoming second nature. Like romance is supposed to fix whatever's broken in me. Ethan smiled without humor. I get the same thing. You should move on. Grace would want you to be happy. Like grief has an expiration date. Does it bother you that people assume we're together? Used to. Now I just feel tired by it. He drank coffee that actually tasted good instead of burnt. We're friends. Why isn't that enough? Because people need simple narratives. Trauma bonding is too complicated for Hollywood endings. They sat with that truth, two people who'd been broken by the same machine, now trying to rebuild it into something that wouldn't break others. Not romance. Something more complicated and possibly more important. Lily's 8th birthday came in December, nearly a year after everything had shattered and reformed. Ethan threw a party at their new apartment, inviting her school friends and Sarah Chen, and even Vivian, who showed up with presents wrapped too perfectly to have been done by her own hands. Lily opened gifts with enthusiasm that reminded Ethan of Grace, that same fierce joy in small pleasures. Books about women scientists. A robotics kit for beginners. Clothes that actually fit instead of hand-me-downs chosen for affordability. Later, after friends had gone home and Lily was helping clean up, she turned to her father with a question in her eyes. Ed, are we rich now? Ethan considered how to answer. They weren't wealthy by Seattle tech standards, but they also weren't 3 weeks from eviction anymore. We're comfortable. We don't have to worry about money the way we used to. Is that because of Mom? Because of what happened to her? The question cut deep because it was exactly right. Grace's death had been transformed into salary and benefits and stability, tragedy monetized into middle-class security. Yes and no. We're comfortable because people decided what happened to Mom was wrong, and they're trying to make it right. But nothing makes it right. Nothing brings her back. Lily nodded, wise beyond her years. I know, but I think Mom would be happy we're okay now. She probably would be. Grace had spent their marriage worrying about money, about Lily's medical needs, about building a stable future. She died trying to make the world safer. In some twisted way, her death had finally provided the security she'd wanted. Ethan held his daughter and tried not to cry, tried not to think about the cosmic injustice of needing to lose everything before gaining anything back. 14 months after Marcus's arrest, Ethan received notification about Lily's cochlear implant surgery. The procedure had been scheduled and rescheduled 3 times as doctors debated candidacy, and Ethan wrestled with whether technological intervention was right for his daughter or just his desire to fix something that wasn't broken. Lily had been involved in the decision, attending appointments, asking questions, ultimately deciding for herself. "I want to hear your voice, Dad, just once." The surgery happened at Seattle Children's Hospital on a Tuesday morning in March. Ethan sat in the waiting room for 4 hours, Vivian beside him, because she'd insisted on being there, both of them signing, instead of speaking, because words felt inadequate. When the surgeon emerged, she was smiling. "The procedure went perfectly. The implant is in place. We'll activate it in 3 weeks after healing." 3 weeks of waiting. 3 weeks of Lily recovering, optimistic and nervous in equal measure. 3 weeks of Ethan wondering if this was right, if he was helping his daughter, or trying to change her into someone more convenient for a hearing world. Vivian noticed his anxiety, addressed it directly. "You're terrified you're betraying her." They were in her office reviewing safety protocols that no longer felt abstract. "Grace taught me to love Lily exactly as she is. What if the implant makes her think we didn't?" "The implant doesn't change who she is, it gives her options." Vivian's hands were gentle, patient. "I wear hearing aids. They don't make me less deaf. They just let me navigate both worlds." "But you hide your deafness." "I did. I don't anymore." She met his eyes. "Because you and Lily taught me I didn't have to. That being deaf isn't shame, it's just fact." The activation day came with spring rain turning Seattle into a watercolor. Ethan and Lily sat in the audiologist's office, equipment surrounding them, the moment carrying weight that felt crushing. Dr. Martinez, patient and experienced with anxious families, explained the process. "I'm going to turn on the implant. Lily will start hearing sounds she's never heard before. It might be overwhelming. That's normal." She activated the device. Lily's eyes went wide, then wider. Her hands flew to her head, not in pain, but in shock. The world had been silent her entire life, and suddenly it was full of noise. Monitor beeping, air conditioning humming, Ethan's breathing. Tears ran down her face. Ethan started to sign, asking if she was okay, but Lily shook her head. Then she spoke aloud, voice small and uncertain, but clear. "Dad," Ethan's throat closed. He'd heard his daughter's voice before, but this was different. This was her hearing herself speak, understanding the sound in real time. "Bah, I'm right here, sweetheart." Lily's face crumpled, overwhelmed by sensation. She reached for him, and Ethan pulled her close while she cried against his chest. Joy and fear and strangeness all mixed together, the complexity of gaining something she'd never known she was missing. Vivian watched from the doorway, tears on her own face, and Ethan wondered if she was thinking about her mother, about the explosion that had taken hearing and life and left silence in its wake. The drive home was quiet, despite Lily now having the ability to hear. She'd asked to turn the implant off, needed time to process, to return to the silence that felt safe and familiar. Dr. Martinez had warned this would happen, that adaptation took months, that some days Lily would wear the implant and some days she wouldn't. "That's okay," she'd said. "Let Lily control when and how she engages with hearing. This is her body, her choice." At home, Lily turned the implant back on, experimenting. She ran water in the sink, giggling at the sound, dropped a book on the floor just to hear the thud. Asked Ethan to read aloud so she could hear his voice, shape words she'd only seen through signing. "You sound like light," she said, inexplicably perfect description that made no linguistic sense but somehow captured exactly how voice could feel to someone experiencing it newly. Over the following weeks, Lily adapted. She wore the implant at school, where sound helped navigate crowded hallways and cafeteria chaos. She took it off at home, sometimes returning to silence when the world became too loud. She learned to code switch between deaf and hearing spaces, comfortable in both, limited by neither. Ethan watched his daughter navigate complexity with grace he couldn't match, and realized she was teaching him more than he'd ever taught her. 18 months after the arrest, Marcus was released on early parole. He'd served 16 months of his 3-year sentence, time reduced for good behavior and overcrowding, and the persistent reality that white-collar criminals rarely serve full terms. The news broke on a Friday. Ethan saw it while reviewing safety reports, felt the old anger rise hot and immediate. 16 months for killing Grace, for covering it up, for threatening Lily's medical care. 16 months that hadn't even been hard time, just minimum security inconvenience. He drove to Marcus's house that evening, not planning to just finding himself there. The neighborhood was expensive houses with actual yards and 2-car garages. Marcus's wife had divorced him during imprisonment, taken the kids to her sister's place in California, but the house remained his property. Marcus answered the door, looking older, grayer, wearing humility that might have been genuine or might have been performance. His ankle monitor was gone, parole complete. "Ethan, I wondered if you'd come." "I don't know why I'm here. Do you want to come in?" They sat in Marcus's living room, expensive furniture that Jennifer had left behind because moving it wasn't worth the hassle. Photos of his children still on the walls, frozen in time before their father became a criminal. Marcus spoke first. "I'm teaching ethics courses at 3 universities. Required community service, 200 hours a year for 10 years. They put me in front of business students, and I tell them what happens when you prioritize profit over people. Does it help telling your story? I don't know. Maybe some of them learn. Maybe most of them think they're smarter than me, that they won't get caught." Marcus's hands shook slightly. "Jennifer won't let me see the kids. Says I'm a bad influence, that I taught them the wrong lessons about integrity." Ethan should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he just felt tired. "You made choices. These are consequences." "I know, I'm not asking for sympathy." Marcus met his eyes. "I'm just telling you that you were right. Grace was right, and I was a coward who called my cowardice pragmatism. Every day I live with that. Every day I wonder what kind of man I could have been if I'd chosen differently." They sat in silence, 2 men on opposite sides of Grace's death, neither one whole, neither one healed. Finally, Ethan stood. "I hope your students learn something. I hope you actually mean what you're saying." "I do, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth something. Not enough, but something." Ethan left, drove home through rain that never stopped, wondered if forgiveness was supposed to feel different than this empty acknowledgement that people were complicated and justice was imperfect and life kept moving forward regardless. 2 years after the shareholder meeting, Ethan used money from the settlement to buy Harbor Grounds Cafe. The previous owner was retiring, happy to sell to someone who understood the neighborhood, who'd worked the counter and knew the regulars by name. He renovated carefully, keeping the character that made it feel like home. Added ramps for wheelchair accessibility, hired staff fluent in ASL, posted the menu in multiple formats including Braille and large print, created quiet hours for people with sensory sensitivities. The grand reopening was small, just neighbors and former coworkers and people who remembered when this place had been Ethan's lifeline during the worst years. Lily helped serve coffee, delighted by responsibility and attention in equal measure. She wore her cochlear implant today, navigating between signed and spoken orders with ease that came from practice. Tyler, the barista, who'd been cruel to Vivian 2 years ago, stopped by to apologize. "I was an asshole. I'm sorry." Ethan could have rejected it, held the grudge, but what was the point? You were young. People learn. "I work at a school for deaf kids now, teaching them computer science. Turns out I needed to learn some things." Growth happened. Not for everyone, not consistently, but often enough to matter. Vivian arrived late, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of CEO armor, hair down and face relaxed. She'd stepped down from her advisory role 6 months ago, needed distance from Nextline to figure out who she was beyond her father's daughter. She was consulting for nonprofits, now helping organizations build ethical tech infrastructure, making enough money to survive, but not enough to insulate herself from consequences. "This place looks good. Feels like it did before, but better." That was the goal. Familiar but improved. They sat by the window, steam from coffee cups curling in afternoon light. Lily was in the back with Sarah, learning how to make foam art, laughter carrying through the space. "Do you ever think about what we'd be doing if none of this happened?" Vivian's question was quiet, almost lost in the cafe noise. "Grace would still be alive. That's all that matters. But you'd still be struggling. I'd still be my father's puppet. We'd both be miserable in different ways." Ethan considered that uncomfortable truth. Grace's death had freed him from poverty and Vivian from her father's control. Saying it aloud felt obscene, but ignoring it felt dishonest. "I'd trade comfortable misery for Grace in a heartbeat." "I know. I would too." Vivian's hands moved gently. "But we can't trade, so we build something that honors what we've learned." Outside Seattle, rain fell steady and gray. Inside, coffee steamed and conversation hummed, and Lily's laughter mixed with Sarah's in the particular music of people who'd survived and chosen to keep living. Anyway, 6 months later, on what would have been Grace's 40th birthday, Ethan and Lily drove to the cemetery. They brought flowers not because Grace had particularly loved flowers, but because it was what people did, the ritual that made grief feel manageable. Lily had written a letter, reading it aloud at the grave despite rain soaking the paper. "Dear Mom, I'm 9 now. I can hear Dad's voice, but I still sign because you taught me language isn't just sound. Dad bought a coffee shop, and I help sometimes. I'm learning to code it like you did. I want to make things that help people like you wanted to." She folded the letter, placed it on the grave where rain would eventually destroy it. "I miss you every day. But we're okay. We're going to be okay." Ethan held his daughter while rain fell and flowers wilted, and the dead stayed dead regardless of how much the living needed them back. That evening, Vivian called. "I forgot what day it was. I'm sorry." "It's okay. We're okay. I'm working on something. A proposal for federal legislation requiring independent safety boards for all autonomous vehicle companies, making what we did at Nextline legally mandatory everywhere." Ethan closed his eyes, felt something like hope. "Grace would have loved that." "I know. That's why I'm doing it. The bill's being introduced next month. Probably won't pass on first attempt, but we'll keep trying." Systems change slowly, grudgingly, only under pressure from people who refuse to accept that corporate profit justified human casualties. Grace had been one person trying to change a system that crushed individuals. But maybe enough people pushing together could shift something massive enough to matter. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you for not giving up, for making sure her voice wasn't erased. After hanging up, Ethan sat at his kitchen table in the apartment he could now afford, looking at photos of Grace scattered across his life. Wedding day, holding newborn Lily, last birthday before the accident, smiling at something outside the frame. He picked up his phone, texted Vivian back. "We should do something, a memorial scholarship maybe, for engineering students who want to work in safety instead of just innovation." Her response came quickly. "Yes, let's make something that lasts." They were building something from ruins. Not a happy ending, because happy endings required everyone surviving and nobody had. But an honest ending where people who'd been broken tried to build something that prevented other people from being broken the same way. Lily appeared from her bedroom, homework completed, ready for the bedtime ritual they'd established. "Can we read Mom's letters?" Ethan had saved every email Grace had sent him, printed and bound them in a book that was becoming worn from repeated reading. They read one together, Grace's voice alive in words, if nowhere else. "Your dad is the best man I know, and you, sweet Lily, are the best thing we ever made. I love you both more than words can say." Lily traced the words with her finger, then looked at her father. "Do you think Mom knows we're okay?" Ethan didn't know what he believed about death and consciousness and whether the dead watch the living, but he knew what his daughter needed to hear. "I think she knows, and I think she's proud of who you're becoming." "I hope so." She went to bed, and Ethan sat alone with Grace's words, with the bracelet on his wrist still bearing its engraved reminder. Listen with your heart. He'd listened. He'd fought. He'd won incomplete victories and accepted imperfect justice. He'd survived when Grace hadn't, and that guilt would never fully release him. But he'd also built something, a company that put safety first, a foundation that protected whistleblowers, a coffee shop that welcomed everyone, a daughter who was brave and brilliant and determined to make the world better. Grace had tried to save lives and lost her own. Ethan had tried to honor her death by preventing others. In the space between those two attempts lived every complicated emotion that didn't fit into simple narratives about good and evil, justice and revenge, healing and harm. The rain stopped. Seattle nights were dark but never fully silent, always the hum of traffic and distant sirens and the city breathing around him. Ethan stood at his window, looking out at lights that marked other people's lives, other stories unfolding in parallel. Somewhere Marcus was teaching ethics to students who might or might not learn. Somewhere Vivian was drafting legislation that might or might not pass. Somewhere 47 families were living with losses that no amount of money or reform would erase. And here in this apartment that was finally warm, Ethan Carter was surviving. More than surviving. Building. Creating. Honoring the woman he had loved by making sure her death demanded more from the world than comfortable silence. He touched the bracelet, 5 words that had guided him through the worst years. Listen with your heart, Grace's last lesson, the one that mattered most. He was listening, and the world slowly, grudgingly was starting to hear.